Please don't marry her. She'll hurt Mommy.
Don't let her see me. Noah whispered it into Daniel's jacket, then squeezed himself against the groom's legs as if he were trying to hide. Daniel looked down at the 3-year-old. What happened? Noah didn't answer. Across the room, Maria had stopped moving. Daniel followed the boy's eyes and saw Claire standing beside the wedding flowers, smiling at the guests. Except she wasn't smiling anymore. Her eyes were fixed on Noah. Come here, Noah, Claire said softly. The little boy shook his head. Then he looked up at Daniel, his lower lip trembling. Please don't marry her. Daniel's face changed. Why? Noah glanced at Maria. Then, barely loud enough for Daniel to hear, he whispered, She'll hurt Mommy. The room went quiet, and Maria finally said the words she had been too afraid to tell Daniel for months. I saw Claire with another man. Welcome to Mr. Graham's story, where every story leaves a lesson. Whether you're new here or part of our growing family, thank you for being here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and as the story unfolds, tell me what you would have done in the same situation. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring more meaningful stories to people around the world. Now, let's begin today's story. Years before a 3-year-old boy stopped his wedding, Daniel Mercer had already learned how to be careful. At 42, he was the kind of man people assumed had everything figured out. He was a self-made billionaire. His company had grown far beyond what he had imagined when he started it, and his name appeared often enough in business magazines that strangers sometimes recognized him before he recognized them. Daniel never got used to that part. He still preferred quiet mornings outside Charleston. He liked coffee before conversation. He answered emails earlier than most people were awake and could spend 14 hours at work without noticing the time. His staff occasionally joked that Daniel probably checked spreadsheets for fun. He always denied it. Nobody believed him. But business was where Daniel felt comfortable. Numbers had rules, people didn't. He had learned that after his first marriage ended. There hadn't been some spectacular betrayal that made the newspapers. No ugly courtroom fight, no public accusations. The marriage had simply worn down. For a long time, Daniel and his first wife had lived in the same house, eaten at the same table, and handled the same responsibilities while slowly becoming strangers. By the time they finally admitted the marriage was over, neither of them seemed surprised. The divorce changed Daniel. He didn't become bitter. If anything, he became quieter. He told himself that if he ever trusted someone again, it would have to be because she cared about Daniel, not Mercer money, not the company, not the houses, and not the life that came with his last name. Then he met Claire Whitmore. It happened at a private charity dinner in Charleston. Daniel had almost skipped the event. He'd had a long day and had already spent most of the evening thinking about leaving before the dessert arrived. Then Claire sat beside him. She didn't ask about his company. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people eventually did. She asked whether he had always lived in South Carolina. Daniel told her no. She asked where he had grown up. He answered. Then, somehow, they spent the next 40 minutes talking about her mother's garden. Daniel told her about the time he tried growing tomatoes. It went badly, he admitted. Claire laughed. How badly? I killed them. All of them, every single one. She smiled. That's impressive. Daniel laughed too. It was a small conversation. Nothing dramatic happened. That was probably why he remembered it. Claire wasn't trying to impress him. At least, that's what Daniel believed. Over the next few months, she became part of his life without making a production of it. She learned that he liked breakfast early. She knew when not to interrupt him during certain meetings. She noticed when he became unusually quiet. Sometimes she'd leave coffee near his office without saying anything. If he had a difficult day, she didn't immediately demand an explanation. She simply stayed close. Daniel appreciated that. After his divorce, he had expected love to feel complicated. With Claire, it felt easy. That mattered more to him than he admitted. Claire never pushed him toward marriage. She didn't ask how much a particular property was worth. She didn't make comments about his cars or his clothes. She seemed comfortable around wealth without appearing impressed by it. Daniel took that as a sign. Maybe, finally, he had met someone who saw him before she saw everything else. One evening, after they'd been together for several months, Daniel came home from work later than expected. Claire was sitting at the kitchen island with a book. She looked up. "You're late, I know. Bad day? Long day." She closed the book. "Do you want dinner?" Daniel loosened his tie. "Did you eat?" She shrugged. "Not really. You should have eaten. So should you." He looked at her. She smiled. For some reason, that ordinary exchange stayed with him. There was no grand declaration, no promise, just two people standing in a kitchen, both too tired to pretend they weren't tired. Daniel thought that was what a real relationship was supposed to feel like. Safe, normal. He didn't realize that sometimes the things that make a person feel safe are also the things that make them stop asking questions. Claire Whitmore had learned something about money long before she met Daniel. It could disappear. She had watched it happen in her own family. Her father had once owned a successful business. Not anything close to Daniel's world, but enough for Claire's childhood to feel comfortable. There had been vacations, a nice house, dinners with relatives, and the quiet assumption that tomorrow would look a lot like today. Then the business failed. Claire remembered the phone calls more than the details. Her mother stopped answering some of them. Relatives who used to visit suddenly became busy. People who had laughed with her father at family gatherings found reasons not to return. Claire was old enough to notice, young enough to misunderstand it. Years later, she understood exactly what had happened. People treated you differently when they believed you could no longer do anything for them. That lesson stayed with her. By the time Claire was an adult, she had developed a belief she rarely questioned. Love was important, but security came first. She never said it that plainly to Daniel. She didn't have to. She believed she could build a life where she had both. Daniel gave her something she'd always wanted, without realizing how much she wanted it. Stability. A future that didn't depend on whether a business had a good quarter. A home nobody could suddenly lose. A life where she wouldn't have to watch her mother's face while another bill sat unopened on the kitchen counter. And Claire genuinely liked Daniel. That part was never completely fake. She liked the way he thought. She liked that he didn't need to be the loudest person in a room. She liked that he could be difficult and generous within the same 5 minutes. Once, during an argument about something neither of them could remember afterward, Daniel had walked out of the room, returned 30 seconds later and said, "I forgot what I was mad about." Claire had laughed so hard she nearly cried. Daniel had stared at her. "What? You're unbelievable. I know." Those were the moments she loved. The problem was that Claire had learned to measure love against the possibility of losing everything, and that made her think differently about marriage. Especially marriage to a man like Daniel. That was where Ethan Cole came in. Claire had known Ethan socially before Daniel. He was charming without trying too hard, intelligent enough to make people underestimate how ambitious he was, and constantly convinced that his next opportunity was going to change his life. It never quite did. His career had stalled, one project had failed, another had never gotten off the ground. He was still good at talking about what he was going to do. Claire had always found that attractive. At first, seeing Ethan again was harmless, a conversation here, a drink there, an occasional message. Then one evening, Ethan asked her a question she knew she shouldn't answer. "Are you really marrying him?" Claire looked at him. "You know I am." "I know." "Then why ask?" Ethan shrugged. "Just wanted to hear you say it." She should have left. Instead, she stayed. That was how it started. Not with some grand decision, just one bad choice that made the next one easier. Soon their conversations became private, then secret. Then something Claire could no longer honestly call a mistake. Ethan knew about Daniel's wealth, but what interested him most wasn't the number. It was access. "You know things now that you didn't know before," he told Claire one night. "What things?" "His properties, his business, how he handles money." Claire frowned. "We're getting married." "Exactly." She didn't like the direction of the conversation, but she didn't end it. Ethan leaned back. "I'm not saying you take anything. I know. I'm saying you need to understand what you're walking into." Claire looked away. She already understood, more than Ethan probably realized. She knew Daniel had properties held personally. She knew there were business interests he rarely discussed outside his inner circle. She knew marriage would change her position, not immediately, but eventually. And if she ever needed protection, she wanted options. That was the word she used with herself. Options, not money, not control. Options. It sounded better. Over the next few weeks, Ethan asked questions. What did Daniel own? Which properties mattered most? Did he have plans to restructure anything before the wedding? Would Claire be involved in those decisions? Claire never gave Ethan everything he wanted to know, but she gave him enough. And then she started asking Daniel questions herself, casually. One night, they were sitting at the kitchen table when Claire mentioned one of his properties. Why is that still under your name? Daniel looked up from his phone. Which one? The one in Georgia. He thought for a moment. Never had a reason to move it. Wouldn't it be easier if things were organized differently after we're married? Daniel smiled. Are you already reorganizing my life? She smiled back. No. Good. I was just asking. I know. He returned to his phone. Claire watched him for a second. She hadn't expected him to be suspicious. He wasn't. Instead, he seemed pleased that she was thinking about their future. That made something inside her settle. She told herself she was simply learning how their lives would fit together. Ethan called the next evening. So? Claire was quiet. He doesn't suspect anything. Ethan laughed softly. He trusts you. Claire didn't answer, because that sentence sounded different now. Not flattering, not romantic, heavy. She had earned Daniel's trust. And she was beginning to understand that trust could give a person access that money alone couldn't buy. Neither of them called it a plan. Not yet. But the wedding was getting closer, and Claire was no longer thinking only about becoming Daniel's wife. She was thinking about what being Daniel's wife would allow her to become. Maria had worked for Daniel Mercer for 15 years, long enough to remember when he had one assistant instead of a department, long enough to know which coffee he wanted when he was tired and which kind he claimed to like when guests were around, and long enough to tell him when he was being foolish. Daniel didn't always enjoy hearing it. He usually listened anyway. That was why Maria had never thought of herself as just the housekeeper. She cared about the house, of course. She kept things running, knew where everything belonged, and noticed problems before they became expensive ones. But Daniel had also become someone she trusted, and he trusted her. Her son Noah had grown up around the estate. At 3 years old, he treated the place like a second home, though Maria was careful about that. She never wanted Noah believing that Daniel's generosity was something he was entitled to. Daniel liked the boy. Noah liked Daniel even more. He had once spent 20 minutes explaining to Daniel why his toy truck was better than every vehicle parked in the driveway. Daniel had listened seriously. Maria had laughed from the kitchen. That was the kind of relationship they had. Simple, comfortable. Which was why Maria hated what she had seen. It happened several months before the wedding. Daniel had asked her to retrieve a folder from one of the rooms near his office. Maria walked down the hallway, knocked once, and opened the door. She stopped. Claire was inside. So was Ethan. Maria didn't know why Ethan was there. She didn't need to ask. The conversation stopped the moment they saw her. Claire's face changed first. Not dramatically, just enough. Ethan stepped away from her. Maria stood there holding the door. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Claire smiled. Maria. Maria looked at Ethan. Mr. Cole. Hey, Ethan said. His voice sounded strangely casual. Maria nodded. I came for the folder. Claire pointed toward the desk. It should be there. Maria picked it up. She didn't ask questions. She walked out. She made it all the way to her car before she sat down. Then she just stared through the windshield. Her phone was in her hand. Daniel's name was on the screen. One call. That was all it would take. But Maria couldn't make herself press it. What if she'd misunderstood? What if Ethan had a legitimate reason for being there? What if Claire explained everything? And what if Daniel believed Claire instead of her? Maria looked at the house. She knew what that job meant. It paid Noah's daycare. It paid their bills. It gave her the stability she had spent years protecting. She put the phone down. "Not today," she whispered. But today became tomorrow. Then another day. Claire seemed to let the incident disappear. For a while. Then small things started changing. A dinner reservation Maria had confirmed was suddenly called a mistake. A missing item that Maria had never handled became her responsibility. Claire began questioning little decisions. "Are you sure you put that there? I didn't move it." "Well, somebody did." Maria would simply nod and keep working. None of it was serious enough for Daniel to notice. That was what made it effective. Claire wasn't trying to destroy her. She was trying to make her look unreliable. One afternoon, Claire stood near the kitchen while Maria was sorting deliveries. "You've been here a long time," Claire said. Maria looked up. 15 years. That is a long time." "Yes," Claire smiled. "Things are going to change around here." Maria waited. Claire picked up one of the envelopes from the counter, glanced at it, and put it back. "Daniel deserves people around him who understand his new life." Maria looked at her. "I understand, Daniel." "I know." Claire smiled again, then she walked away. Maria stood there for a moment. She understood perfectly. Later that week, Claire mentioned something to Daniel. "Have you noticed Maria seems different lately?" Daniel looked up from his laptop. "Different how?" "I don't know, more emotional. She's fine." Claire shrugged. "Maybe." Daniel closed the laptop. "Maria's family." Claire gave him a small smile. "I know." She didn't argue. That should have stayed with him. It didn't. Maria continued working. She continued saying nothing. But now she was watching Claire more carefully. And she noticed something else. Claire's questions about Daniel's finances were becoming more frequent. Not enough to look suspicious, just enough to make Maria uncomfortable. Maria wanted to tell Daniel. Several times she almost did, but every time she imagined sitting across from him and saying, "I think your fiancé is involved with another man," the same fear stopped her. She had no messages, no recording, no proof, only what she had seen. And if she was wrong, there would be no taking those words back. Then Noah started noticing things too. One afternoon, Maria was walking with him down the hallway when they heard voices around the corner. Claire was speaking sharply. Maria stopped. Noah looked up. A moment later, Claire appeared. Her expression changed when she saw the boy. She smiled, but Noah didn't. He reached for Maria's hand. Claire looked down at him. "Don't worry, sweetheart." Noah moved closer to his mother. Maria noticed. She didn't say anything. That night, after Noah was in bed, he asked quietly, "Mommy?" "Yes? Is Claire mad at you?" Maria stopped folding his pajamas. "No." Noah watched her. She looked mad. Maria forced a small smile. "Grown-ups get upset sometimes." "Did you do something?" "No." "Then why?" Maria sat beside him. "You don't need to worry about grown-up problems." Noah frowned. He clearly didn't understand. Maria kissed his forehead. "Go to sleep." He closed his eyes. But Maria stayed beside him a little longer, because she knew something Noah didn't. Whatever was happening between Claire and Ethan, it was no longer staying between them, and Maria was running out of time to decide whether silence was still protecting anyone. Maria didn't lose her job. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, things around her simply became harder. On a Tuesday morning, Claire came into the kitchen holding a reservation card. Was this supposed to be for tonight? Maria looked at it. Yes. Claire frowned. It says tomorrow. Maria took the card from her. She checked the date. Then the confirmation email on her phone. It's for tonight, 7:30. Claire looked again. Oh. She handed it back. Maybe I read it wrong. Maria nodded. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. An hour later, Daniel asked why a restaurant had called, asking whether his reservation was still confirmed. Maria explained. Daniel barely looked up from his laptop. Okay. Claire was sitting across from him. She said quietly, I just thought Maria had mixed up the date. Maria looked at her. Daniel looked up. Did you? No. There was a short silence. Claire smiled. Fine, then I misunderstood. Daniel returned to his screen. Maria went back to work. Nothing had happened. At least, nothing anyone could point to. That was becoming Claire's strength. A person could defend themselves against an accusation. It was much harder to defend themselves against a pattern of tiny doubts. A week later, Maria couldn't find a silver serving tray. Claire asked about it twice. I put it in the cabinet after Saturday's dinner. It isn't there. I'll check. Maria checked the pantry, then the storage room. Nothing. Claire followed her. You've always been very organized. Maria stopped. The sentence sounded like a compliment. It didn't feel like one. I still am. Claire smiled. I know. The tray turned up the next morning in a cabinet nobody used. Maria hadn't put it there. She didn't say that. She simply carried it back to the dining room. By then she had started keeping notes. Not because she wanted to build a case against Claire. She just needed to remember what actually happened. That frightened her more than she wanted to admit. She had begun second-guessing herself, and Claire seemed to know it. One afternoon, Daniel found Maria standing in the hallway with a stack of folded linens. You okay? Maria adjusted the stack in her arms. I'm fine. Daniel gave her a look. You've been saying that for 15 years. She almost smiled. Then you should know what it means. He laughed. There she is. For a second, Maria nearly told him. She looked toward the stairs, then back at Daniel. Daniel, he waited. She swallowed. Never mind. He nodded slowly. Okay. He didn't push. That was the problem. He trusted her enough to believe she'd speak when she was ready, and Maria trusted him enough to know how badly he would be hurt if she was wrong. Later that evening, Claire brought it up. She's been strange. Daniel was taking off his watch. Who? Maria, he sighed. What now? Claire leaned against the counter. I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong. Then what are you saying? I just think she's taking things personally lately. Daniel looked at her. Like what? Claire hesitated. Us. What about us? I don't know. The wedding, everything changing. Daniel shook his head. Maria's happy for us. I hope so. She is. Claire looked down. I just don't want you to be blind to it because you've known her forever. That got his attention. Daniel set his watch on the counter. Blind to what? Claire immediately softened. Nothing, forget it. No, you brought it up. She shook her head. I shouldn't have. Claire, she looked at him. I just think sometimes people who have been around a long time feel like they have a claim on things. Daniel stared at her. Maria doesn't think she has a claim on me. I didn't say she did. You basically did. Claire sighed. See, this is exactly why I didn't want to bring it up. Daniel rubbed his forehead. He was tired, and he hated conversations that turned into something larger than they needed to be. Maria is family, he said. Claire nodded. I know. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply picked up her glass and walked toward the other room. Daniel watched her go. Then he looked at the watch on the counter. For several seconds he said nothing. The conversation should have bothered him. Instead, what bothered him was that he had defended Maria without knowing why Claire had raised the subject in the first place. The next morning, Maria arrived early. Claire was already in the kitchen. They stood across from each other. Claire spoke first. Daniel thinks you're family. Maria said nothing. Claire smiled. I hope you know how fortunate you are. Maria looked at her. I do. Good. Claire picked up her coffee. Then let's keep things that way. She walked out. Maria remained where she was. For the first time, she understood something clearly. Claire wasn't trying to make Daniel fire her. She was trying to make Daniel question her. And if that happened slowly enough, nobody would ever know exactly when Maria stopped being trusted. The closer the wedding got, the more often Claire asked Daniel questions about money. She never asked in a way that sounded like an interrogation. That was what made it easy for him. One evening, they were sitting at the kitchen table with takeout containers between them. Claire picked up a piece of chicken and said, Can I ask you something? Daniel looked up. That usually means you're going to... She smiled. Fair. He waited. What happens to your properties after we get married? Daniel leaned back. Nothing happens to them. I mean legally. Why? Claire shrugged. I've been thinking about us. Daniel smiled. That's dangerous. She laughed. I'm serious. So am I. She nudged his hand. Do you keep everything separate? Most of it. Why? Because I built it before I met you. Claire nodded. That answer seemed to satisfy her. Then she asked another question. And the businesses? Daniel looked at her for a moment. What about them? Do they all stay under the same structure? Pretty much. Claire took a sip of water. Would you ever change that? Daniel smiled. Are you trying to reorganize my life again? No. Good. I just want to understand. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You will. Claire smiled. That was exactly what she wanted to hear. She didn't need Daniel to hand her anything, not yet. She needed him to believe she was asking because she cared about their future. And Daniel did. The next morning, Claire called Ethan from her car. He told me most of it is separate. Ethan was quiet. That's good. What does that mean? It means you need to know what isn't. Claire frowned. Daniel isn't stupid. I didn't say he was. He'll notice if I start asking too many questions. Then stop asking like you're asking for yourself. She looked through the windshield. What am I supposed to do? Listen. Claire didn't answer. Ethan continued. People tell you more when they think you're interested in them. She knew he was right, and she hated that she knew it. Over the next few weeks, Claire changed the way she approached Daniel. She asked less directly. Instead of asking what a property was worth, she'd ask whether he liked the area. Instead of asking how a company was structured, she'd ask whether he planned to keep it. Instead of asking what would happen if something went wrong, she'd ask what he wanted their life to look like 10 years from now. Daniel noticed the difference. He liked it. One night after dinner he said, You know what I like about you? Claire looked over. What? You actually think about the future. She smiled. I think about everything. I've noticed. He laughed. She leaned against his shoulder. What do you want? Daniel was quiet for a moment. A house that's actually lived in. Claire smiled. That's it? Maybe kids. She looked at him. Daniel shrugged. I'm not getting younger. Claire laughed softly. 42 isn't ancient. Tell my niece that. She laughed again. Daniel smiled. It was an ordinary conversation, and for a moment Claire almost forgot what she was doing. Almost. Because when Daniel went upstairs later, Ethan called. You've got him comfortable, Ethan said. Claire sat alone in the kitchen. He trusts me. I know. She closed her eyes. Sometimes I feel bad. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Bad about what? Everything. You're not stealing from him. I know. You're protecting yourself. Claire looked at the empty chair across from her. That's what I keep telling myself. It happens to be true. She didn't respond. The next week, Daniel mentioned a property he was considering, moving into a different holding structure. Claire listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. Later, she wrote down the name, then another. She began keeping small notes, not enough to look suspicious, but enough to help her remember. Maria noticed. She saw Claire sitting in the study one afternoon looking at paperwork Daniel had left on the desk. Maria stopped in the doorway. Claire looked up. What? Nothing. Maria's eyes moved to the papers. Claire placed her hand over them. I was just curious. Maria nodded. She walked away. That evening, Maria stood in her room after Noah had gone to sleep. She stared at her phone. Daniel's name was on the screen again. Her thumb hovered over it. She could tell him about Claire and Ethan. She could tell him about the questions. She could tell him what she'd seen. But she still didn't have enough proof. And now there was something else. Claire wasn't simply interested in Daniel's money. She was learning how it worked. Maria put the phone down, then picked it up again. She nearly called. Instead, she whispered to herself, just wait. She didn't know that waiting was becoming the most dangerous decision she had made. Noah was 3, which meant Maria spent a lot of time explaining things he wasn't old enough to understand. Why he couldn't eat cookies before dinner, why the truck had to stay on the floor instead of the stairs, why Mummy couldn't answer every question while she was working. He accepted most of those explanations. Adults, however, were harder, especially Claire. Noah didn't know why Claire sometimes smiled at him and sometimes didn't. He didn't know why Maria's voice changed when Claire walked into a room. He only knew that something felt different. One afternoon, Maria was carrying a basket of folded towels through the downstairs hallway when Claire stepped out of the study. Maria. Maria stopped. Yes? I've been looking for those documents. They're on Daniel's desk. I asked you to put them in the cabinet. Maria frowned. I thought you wanted Daniel to review them first. I changed my mind. Maria adjusted the basket against her hip. Okay, I'll move them. Claire stepped closer. You don't need to make everything difficult. Maria stared at her. I wasn't. Claire lowered her voice. You always have an answer. Maria glanced toward the stairs. I'll take care of it. She started to walk away. Claire caught her wrist. It wasn't a hard grab. It didn't need to be. Maria stopped immediately. Let go. Claire's fingers tightened for a second. Then she noticed Noah standing at the end of the hallway. She released Maria. For a moment, nobody moved. Noah was holding his little toy truck. His eyes were fixed on Claire's hand. Claire's face changed almost instantly. She smiled. Oh, hi, sweetheart. Noah didn't move. Claire crouched slightly. Come here. He stepped backward. Maria picked up the basket. Come on, Noah. He ran to her. Claire stood up. Don't worry, she said softly. Noah looked at her. He didn't answer. Maria walked away with him. She didn't speak until they reached the kitchen. Then she crouched in front of him. Are you okay? Noah nodded. Did you get scared? Another nod. Maria closed her eyes briefly. She hated that he had seen it. Not because she was ashamed, because she had spent years making sure Noah never had to carry the weight of adult problems. Now he had seen one anyway. She touched his cheek. Mommy's okay. Noah looked at her wrist. She hurt you. Maria glanced down. There was a faint red mark where Claire had held her. It didn't hurt. Noah frowned. Yes, it did. Maria almost smiled. You're very serious today. He didn't smile. Why was she mad? She wasn't. She was. Maria sat back. There wasn't a good answer. Not one Noah could understand. Sometimes grown-ups get upset. Why? Because people don't always agree. Did you make her mad? No. Then why? Maria looked at him. She realized that telling a 3-year-old that everything was fine wouldn't make him believe her, but telling him the truth would only frighten him more. So she hugged him. You don't have to worry about this. Noah stayed quiet. That evening he was unusually quiet at dinner. Normally he talked through the entire meal. He told Maria about his truck. He asked for more juice. He complained about vegetables with the seriousness of a lawyer defending a client. That night he barely touched his food. Maria noticed. What's wrong? Nothing. She knew that word. It was one of those words adults used when something was definitely wrong. Later, after she'd put him to bed, Maria sat beside him. Noah's eyes were already half closed. Mummy? Yes? Is Claire mad at you? Maria looked at him. No. Noah opened his eyes. She looked mad. Maria smoothed his blanket. Sometimes people look upset when they're thinking. She grabbed you. Maria's hand stopped. You saw that. He nodded. Maria took a breath. Listen to me. Whatever happens between grown-ups, it is not your job to fix it. Noah frowned. Why? Because you're my little boy. He thought about that. Then he asked, Daniel can fix it. Maria almost laughed. The question caught her completely off guard. No. Why? Because Daniel doesn't know. Noah stared at her. Tell him. Maria went still. It was such a simple answer. Tell him. She looked toward the bedroom door, then back at Noah. Go to sleep. But Mummy, go to sleep, baby. He closed his eyes. Maria sat there for another minute. Then she quietly left the room. She walked into the kitchen and picked up her phone. Daniel's name was still there. She pressed it. The call began ringing. Maria stared at the screen. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then she ended the call. She put the phone down. A few seconds later, it rang. Daniel. Maria looked at the screen. She didn't answer, because now she understood something that frightened her. She had spent months telling herself she was protecting Daniel by waiting for proof. But Noah didn't know about proof. He only knew what he had seen. And somehow, that made Maria wonder whether the person who had been most honest about what was happening was the 3-year-old she had been trying so hard to protect. By 9 that morning, the house was already louder than Daniel liked. Someone was carrying flowers through the front hallway. 2 caterers were arguing quietly about where a tray belonged. A photographer kept asking people to move 3 inches to the left. Daniel stood upstairs in front of a mirror while his best man adjusted the back of his jacket. "Too tight?" Daniel asked. "No." "You sure? You've asked me 4 times. Daniel looked at him. "I like confirmation." His friend laughed. "That's why you're a billionaire." Daniel smiled. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. He had slept badly, but he blamed that on the wedding. 42 years old, 1 failed marriage behind him, and somehow he had convinced himself that this time would be different. Downstairs, Claire was already dressed. She had been awake since before sunrise. Her dress had been steamed twice. Her hair was exactly where it was supposed to be. She knew which guests needed to be greeted, which relatives had arrived, and which people Daniel would want to avoid before the ceremony. She looked calm. Almost too calm, Maria noticed. She had been moving through the house quietly, checking tables and helping staff, but her attention kept returning to Noah. He had been asking the same question all morning. "Where Daniel?" Maria glanced toward the stairs. "He's getting ready." "When?" "Soon." Noah looked at the staircase. "Can I see him?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because he's getting married." Noah frowned. "To Claire?" Maria stopped. "Yes." He looked at her face. Maria immediately regretted answering. Noah didn't ask anything else. He simply held his little toy truck tighter. Maria crouched beside him. "Stay with Mommy today, okay?" "Okay, and don't run off." He nodded. Maria kissed his forehead. She wanted to believe that was enough. It wasn't. Across the room, Claire was speaking with one of the wedding coordinators. She noticed Maria watching her. Their eyes met. Claire smiled. Maria looked away. A few minutes later, Claire walked over. "You look tired." Maria continued arranging glasses. "It's been a busy morning." Claire glanced at Noah. "He's been asking about Daniel all morning." "Yes." Claire smiled at the boy. "Noah, are you excited?" He didn't answer. Claire's smile stayed in place, but something in her expression tightened. "That's okay." She walked away. Maria watched her go. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Mummy." "Yes? I don't like her." Maria looked down sharply. "Don't say that." "But not here." Noah went quiet. Maria immediately felt guilty. She had spoken too sharply. She touched his shoulder. "I'm sorry." He looked up. "You mad?" "No." "You're worried." Maria stared at him, 3 years old, and somehow he had started noticing everything she was trying to hide. Before she could answer, music began playing outside. Guests started taking their seats. The ceremony was beginning. Maria's stomach tightened. She looked toward the staircase. Daniel still hadn't come down. For one brief second, she considered going upstairs. She could knock on his door. She could tell him everything. Claire and Ethan. The questions about his money, the way Claire had grabbed her, all of it. But what would she say? "I saw your fiancé with another man months ago, and I waited until the morning of your wedding to tell you." She could already imagine Daniel's face. Not anger, disappointment. Maria lowered her eyes. Then someone called her name. "Maria, we need you near the ceremony area." She nodded. "Coming." She took Noah's hand. He resisted. "I want Daniel." "You'll see him." "When?" "Soon." Maria led him toward the back of the room. She kept her hand around his. The ceremony area was filling quickly. People were smiling. Phones were coming out. Someone complimented Claire's dress. Another guest told Maria how beautiful everything looked. Maria smiled when she was supposed to. She answered when spoken to. But her eyes kept moving toward the house. Upstairs, Daniel finally stepped out of his room. He straightened his cuff. Then he paused at the top of the stairs. From there, he could see the guests below. Claire was standing near the ceremony entrance. She looked beautiful. She looked ready. Daniel smiled to himself. For the first time that morning, he felt certain. He was about to marry the woman he loved. Then, from somewhere downstairs, he heard a little boy calling his name. Daniel! Daniel looked over the railing. Noah had just slipped his hand out of Maria's. Maria reached for him. Noah! But he was already running. And this time Maria couldn't catch him. Daniel barely made it halfway down the stairs before Noah reached him. The little boy came around the corner at full speed, one hand still clutching his toy truck. Hey, buddy! Daniel bent down. Noah didn't slow down. He grabbed the front of Daniel's jacket with both hands. Daniel laughed at first. Easy, you're gonna wrinkle me. Noah didn't laugh. Daniel's smile faded. What happened? Noah looked over Daniel's shoulder. Claire was standing near the ceremony entrance. For a second the boy said nothing. Then he looked back at Daniel. Don't marry her. Daniel blinked. What? Noah pulled harder on his jacket. Please. Daniel lowered himself further. Why? Noah looked toward Claire again. She had stopped moving. Maria was several steps behind him. Her face had gone pale. Noah, she said quietly. The boy didn't turn. Daniel looked at Maria. What is this? Maria opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Claire stepped forward. Daniel, he's 3. Daniel looked at her. I know. He doesn't understand what's happening. I know. Claire smiled nervously. He probably thinks you're leaving or something. Noah shook his head. Then he whispered, She'll hurt Mommy. Daniel went completely still. Maria closed her eyes. Someone behind them whispered, Oh my God. The room had become so quiet that Daniel could hear the faint movement of people shifting in their chairs. He looked down at Noah. What did you say? Noah's eyes filled with tears. She'll hurt Mommy. Daniel looked at Maria. She was shaking her head slightly, not at Noah, at herself, as if she already knew there was no way out of this now. Daniel stood slowly. He didn't take his eyes off Claire. Claire's face had changed. The calm expression she'd worn all morning was gone, only for a moment. But Daniel saw it. He had spent years reading people across conference tables. He knew the difference between surprise and fear. Claire looked frightened. Daniel, she said. He didn't answer. She took another step. Can we please not do this here? Daniel finally looked at her. Do what? Claire glanced at Noah. This. What exactly is this? She stopped. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked around the room. The guests were watching them. Some looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. The wedding coordinator stood near the entrance, holding a clipboard against her chest. The musicians had stopped playing. Daniel looked down at Noah again. The little boy was still holding his jacket. Daniel gently placed a hand on the back of his head. Buddy, who told you that Claire would hurt your mom? Noah shook his head. Nobody. Then how do you know? Noah looked toward Maria. Maria's eyes filled. Daniel followed his gaze. Maria? She swallowed. I didn't tell him anything. Claire spoke quickly. Exactly. Daniel looked at her. She caught herself. I mean, he's a child. Daniel didn't respond. Claire's voice softened. Daniel, this is ridiculous. Maybe she meant it to sound reassuring. It didn't. Daniel turned toward the wedding coordinator. Stop everything. The coordinator stared at him. Sir, stop the ceremony. A murmur moved through the room. Claire's face tightened. Daniel. He looked at her. I said stop. The coordinator nodded quickly and began speaking to the musicians. Guests started whispering. Someone stood. Someone else sat back down. Daniel didn't care. He looked at Maria. Come with me. Maria hesitated. Claire stepped forward. Why? Daniel's eyes moved to her. Because I asked her to. Claire's jaw tightened. Daniel, you don't know what you're doing. He stared at her. No. His voice was quiet. I don't. Then he looked down at Noah. The boy had finally loosened his grip on Daniel's jacket. Daniel picked him up. Noah immediately put his arms around Daniel's neck. Maria watched. Daniel looked at her. Let's go somewhere private. Maria nodded. Claire stepped closer. I should be there. Daniel shook his head. Not yet. The word landed harder than he intended. Claire stopped. Daniel turned away. For the first time since he had met her, he walked away from Claire without explaining himself. And as he disappeared down the hallway with Noah in his arms, Claire remained standing beside the flowers she had spent months choosing. The wedding guests were still watching her, but she wasn't looking at them. She was looking at Maria. And Maria finally understood that whatever happened next, Claire could no longer control the story. Daniel took Noah into a small sitting room at the back of the house. Maria followed. She closed the door behind them. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Noah was still in Daniel's arms. Daniel sat down slowly and let the boy stay where he was. Then he looked at Maria. Tell me what happened. Maria rubbed her hands together. I don't know what he means. Daniel didn't raise his voice. Maria, she looked at him. You know something. Maria looked toward Noah. He shouldn't have said anything. That isn't what I asked. She swallowed. Daniel waited. That was the problem with Daniel when he was serious. He didn't fill silence just because it was uncomfortable. Maria finally whispered, I should have told you. When? A while ago. How long? Maria looked down. Months. Daniel's face changed. Months. Maria nodded. He glanced toward the closed door. The wedding guests were still outside. Claire was still waiting. Daniel looked back at Maria. What did you see? Maria hesitated. Then she said, Claire was with Ethan. Daniel didn't move. Ethan Cole? Yes. Where? In one of the rooms near your office. When? Months ago. And you didn't tell me? Maria's eyes filled. I wanted to. But you didn't. No. Daniel looked down at his hands. Noah shifted against his shoulder. Daniel gently adjusted him. Did you see them doing anything? Maria paused. I saw enough to know they shouldn't have been there together. That isn't an answer. I know. Daniel waited. Maria finally said, They were standing very close. When they saw me, they stopped talking. Daniel's jaw tightened. Did Claire ever explain why Ethan was there? No. Did you ask? No. Why not? Maria looked at him. Because I was scared. Daniel didn't respond. Maria continued. I didn't have proof. I didn't know if I'd misunderstood something. And Claire started making comments about me. She said things to you. Daniel's eyes narrowed. What things? That I was too attached to the household. That maybe I wasn't comfortable with things changing. Daniel looked away. He remembered. Not the exact words, but enough. Maria's voice became quieter. I was afraid you'd believe her. Daniel looked back at her. Did she threaten you? Maria shook her head. Not directly. But she made it clear she could make things difficult. Daniel sat back. For the first time, the pieces he dismissed began appearing in a different order. The reservation, the missing tray, Claire questioning Maria, the comments about her being too attached, and now Ethan. Daniel looked at Noah. The little boy had fallen quiet. Did Noah see anything else? Maria hesitated. Yes. What? A few days ago, Claire grabbed my wrist. Daniel's eyes lifted. She what? It wasn't. Maria. She stopped. She grabbed me during an argument. Why? I don't remember exactly. Daniel stared at her. You don't remember? Maria shook her head. I remember the papers. We were arguing about some documents. What documents? I don't know. Daniel stood. Noah lifted his head. Daniel immediately lowered his voice. Sorry, buddy. He looked at Maria. Why didn't you tell me that? Maria gave a tired little laugh. Because every time I tried to tell you something, I convinced myself I needed more proof. Daniel didn't answer. Maria looked at the floor. I didn't want to ruin your wedding. Daniel's eyes moved toward the door. Outside, people were still talking. The wedding he'd spent months planning was sitting on the other side of that door. But something else had changed. He no longer wanted an explanation from Claire because he needed the wedding to continue. He wanted one because he needed to know what was true. Daniel finally said, "I'm going to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly." Maria nodded. "Do you think Claire is dangerous?" Maria's lips parted. She looked at Noah, then at Daniel. "I don't know." It was the first answer she had given him all morning that sounded completely certain. Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay." Maria looked surprised. "Okay?" "Yes." He picked up his phone. "What are you doing?" "Stopping the wedding." Maria stared at him. "Daniel, I already stopped it. I know." He walked toward the door. Maria stood. "What are you going to tell Claire?" Daniel paused. "I don't know yet." Then he looked back at her. "But I'm not marrying someone while I'm wondering whether the people closest to me are afraid of her." Maria lowered her eyes. Daniel opened the door. Claire was standing several feet away. She had clearly been waiting. Her eyes moved from Daniel to Maria, then to Noah. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked at her. "I need to talk to you." Claire took a breath. "Of course." "Alone." Maria started to step away. Daniel stopped her. "No, stay." Claire's expression changed. Just slightly, Daniel noticed. And this time, he didn't ignore it. Claire remained in the hallway, waiting for Daniel to tell her what was happening. Daniel looked at her once. Then he turned toward Maria. "Come with me." Maria followed. They went into Daniel's office and closed the door. Noah stayed with one of the staff members Maria trusted, though he kept asking where his mother was. Daniel sat behind his desk. Maria took the chair across from him. Neither spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "Start at the beginning." Maria looked down at her hands. "I saw Claire with Ethan." Daniel nodded once. "I know that part. It was months ago. You said that. I should have told you." Daniel leaned back. "You keep saying that." Maria looked up. "I was scared." "Of Claire?" "Yes." Daniel waited. Maria took a breath. "Not because I thought she'd do something to me. Not at first." "What changed?" "She started making little comments. Then things started going wrong around the house." Daniel frowned. "Like what?" "Reservations, missing things that were suddenly my fault." Daniel stared at her. "She wanted you to think I was becoming careless." "Why?" Maria didn't answer immediately. "Because she wanted you to stop trusting me." Daniel's eyes dropped to the desk. He remembered Claire's comments. The way she'd casually suggested Maria was too emotionally attached to the household. The way she had never pushed the accusation too far. Maria continued. "She never came out and said anything terrible. That's what made it hard." Daniel nodded slowly. "She didn't have to." Maria looked at him. "I thought if I told you and you believed her instead, I'd lose everything." "You mean your job?" "My job? Noah's daycare, our bills." Thumb against the side of her hand. "I couldn't take that chance." Daniel looked at her. "Why didn't you at least tell me about Ethan?" Maria's eyes filled. "Because I didn't know what I saw." "You saw them together?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "And you thought that wasn't enough?" Maria shook her head. "I knew what it looked like." "That isn't what I asked." She looked down. "I knew what it looked like." Daniel said nothing. Maria continued. "But I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't hear the whole conversation. And by then Claire had already started making me look difficult." Daniel leaned forward. "Maria, you should have told me." "I know. You could have let me decide what to do with it." "I know." Her voice cracked on the second answer. Daniel stopped. For a moment he looked angry. Then the anger faded. He had spent months believing he was protecting the people around him by making his own decisions. Now he was realizing that his certainty had made it harder for someone like Maria to challenge him. He looked toward the window. "You thought I'd believe her." Maria didn't answer. That was answer enough. Daniel sat back. "And the money?" Maria hesitated. "What about it?" Claire's questions. Maria looked at him. "She asked about properties." "How often?" "A lot." "What exactly did she ask?" Maria told him. "Not every question. only the ones she remembered clearly. Which properties Daniel still held personally, how his businesses were structured, whether he planned to change anything after the wedding, whether certain assets could be reorganized. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked, "Did you tell Noah any of this?" Maria looked almost offended. "No, nothing. Then why did he say she would hurt you?" Maria's face tightened. "Because he saw her grab me." Daniel's eyes hardened. Maria explained what happened in the hallway, how Claire had caught her wrist, how Noah had been standing nearby, how Claire immediately changed her expression when she realized he was watching. Daniel looked away. For several seconds he didn't speak. Then he asked, "Why didn't you tell me that?" Maria gave a tired little smile. "I kept thinking I'd tell you tomorrow." Daniel looked at her. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," she shook her head. It became a very convenient word. That almost made him smile. Almost. Instead, Daniel looked down at his hands. Outside the office, he could hear people moving through the house. The wedding was still there, the flowers, the food, the guests, Claire. Everything he'd expected that morning was waiting on the other side of the door. But now Daniel had a different problem. He didn't need to know whether Maria's story sounded convincing. He needed to know whether it was true. He picked up his phone. Maria watched him. "What are you going to do?" Daniel looked at the screen. "Check. Check what?" "Everything." Maria nodded. Daniel stood. Then he stopped. "Maria." She looked up. "You don't have to protect me from the truth." Maria swallowed. "I know." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I don't think you did." She looked at him. For once, she didn't argue. Daniel opened the office door, and before he stepped out, he made one thing clear. The wedding was no longer the most important thing happening in the house. Finding out who had been telling the truth was. Daniel didn't confront Claire immediately. That surprised Maria. He simply asked everyone to give him some space, cancelled the remaining wedding events, and went upstairs to his office. For the next hour, he made calls. Not angry calls, short ones, questions, dates, names, documents. He started with something simple, Ethan Cole. Daniel had known Ethan casually for years. They had crossed paths at business events and charity functions, but Daniel had never considered him important enough to remember. Now he asked his assistant to check something. Had Ethan been in contact with Claire recently? The answer came back faster than expected. Yes. Daniel stared at the screen. Then he asked for dates. Several of them lined up with the times Claire had told him she was somewhere else. Daniel leaned back. He didn't say anything. He just opened another file, then another. By the time he finished, the pattern was no longer something he could explain away. He found messages between Claire and Ethan. Nothing dramatic at first. A meeting time, a restaurant, a reference to the house. Then a message that made Daniel stop. "Once we're married, she'll have more access." Daniel read it twice. He didn't need to guess who she was. He kept scrolling. There were conversations about Daniel's properties, about how Claire could eventually become involved in financial decisions, about how certain arrangements might be easier to change before the marriage rather than after it. One message from Ethan stood out. "Don't push him too hard, he trusts you." Daniel put the phone down. For a few seconds he stared at the wall. Then he picked it up again. There was no longer any reason to wonder whether Maria had misunderstood what she'd seen. Claire and Ethan had been involved, and they had discussed Daniel's finances. Daniel sat there quietly. The betrayal wasn't the part that surprised him most. It was how ordinary some of the conversations sounded. There were jokes, plans, small complaints about him. At one point, Claire had written that Daniel was too trusting when he really wants something to work. Daniel stopped reading. He locked the phone, then unlocked it again. He read the sentence one more time. After that, he called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, come to the office." A pause. "Are you okay?" "No." Another pause. "Where are you?" "Upstairs. I'll be there." Daniel ended the call. Claire arrived a few minutes later. She stepped inside and closed the door. Her eyes went immediately to the phone on his desk, then to Daniel. "What did you find?" Daniel didn't answer. Claire sat down. "Daniel, were you seeing Ethan?" Silence. She looked down. That was enough. Daniel nodded once. "How long?" Claire rubbed her forehead. "I don't know." "Mouthed. Once. There wasn't any humor in it." "How long?" "Months." Daniel looked away. Claire's voice softened. "I was going to end it. When? I don't know." "You were getting married today." "I know." "Then when exactly were you planning to end it?" Claire had no answer. Daniel leaned back. "Were you talking to him about my properties?" Claire looked at him. "Daniel, that's a yes. No, you were. I asked questions. Why?" Claire's eyes filled. "Because I was scared." Daniel stared at her. "Scared of what?" "Losing everything. You were marrying me." "That's exactly why." Daniel frowned. Claire took a breath. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your family lose everything." "I understand that you had a difficult childhood." "No, you don't." Her voice rose, then fell again. "My father had money, then he didn't. People disappeared. My mother couldn't pay bills. Everything changed." Daniel listened. Claire wiped her cheek. "I promised myself I'd never be that vulnerable. So you chose me for security. I chose you because I loved you." Daniel's eyes stayed on hers. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No." "Were they?" Claire looked down. "No." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then why Ethan?" Claire didn't answer. He didn't ask again. The silence did more than an argument could have. Finally, Daniel said, "Did Ethan tell you to ask about my assets?" Claire closed her eyes. "Sometimes. And you did?" "Yes." Daniel looked toward the window. The wedding guests were still downstairs. Claire followed his gaze. "Daniel," he turned back. "You weren't just preparing to marry me." She said nothing. "You were preparing for what being married to me would give you." Claire's eyes filled again. "I didn't think of it that way." Daniel looked at her. "That's the problem." He reached for the phone and placed it on the desk between them. Claire saw the messages. Her face changed. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Tell me," he said, "how much of this was about me?" Claire stared at the screen, then at him, and for the first time since they met, she had nothing prepared to say. Claire stayed quiet. Daniel waited. She looked at the phone on the desk, then back at him. "I didn't plan for it to become this." Daniel nodded. "That isn't an answer." Claire looked down. "I knew Ethan wanted me to understand your finances." "Why? So I wouldn't be helpless." Daniel leaned back. "You were never helpless." Claire gave a small, frustrated laugh. "You don't know what that feels like." "Then tell me." She looked at him. "When my father's business failed, everything changed. People treated us differently. My mother was terrified all the time. I watched her depend on people who had promised they would always be there." She wiped beneath one eye. "I never wanted to be that woman." Daniel listened. "So you decided you needed an exit plan?" Claire didn't respond. Daniel looked at the phone again. "Was that what Ethan was?" She hesitated. "Partly." The answer seemed to take something out of her. Daniel nodded slowly. "And me?" Claire's voice became quiet. "I loved you." Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "I believe you." Claire looked surprised. He opened his eyes. "That doesn't make this okay. I know. You could have left." "I didn't want to. Then you could have told me the truth. I was afraid." "Of what?" "That you'd stop loving me." Daniel looked at her. "And you thought lying would make that less likely?" Claire didn't answer. That was enough. Daniel stood and walked to the window. He could see the wedding guests beginning to leave. Some were carrying flowers. Others were speaking quietly near the driveway. A few had already gotten into their cars. The morning he had planned for months was disappearing one vehicle at a time. Claire remained in the chair. After a while, Daniel asked, How long were you planning to keep this from me? I don't know. Until after the wedding. I don't know. Until you had access to everything you wanted. Claire looked at him sharply. I never said I wanted everything. You didn't have to. Silence. Daniel turned around. I spent my entire career asking people questions when something didn't make sense. Claire looked down. But with you I stopped. He didn't say it angrily. That almost made it harder to hear. Claire stood. I really did love you. Daniel nodded. I know. She waited. He didn't move toward her. Claire looked at the door. What happens now? Daniel took a breath. The wedding is over. Her face tightened. I know. No, he said. I don't think you do. Claire looked at him. Going to be another conversation where you explain enough for me to feel better about this. She nodded slowly. He opened the door. Claire walked out. Maria was still nearby. She had been waiting quietly, unsure whether she should leave. Daniel saw her. Maria. She stepped closer. Is she gone? She's leaving? Maria nodded. Daniel looked at her. I need to apologize. Maria shook her head. For what? For not noticing. You didn't know. I should have. Maria didn't answer. Daniel glanced toward the hallway. Noah was sitting on the floor with a staff member, pushing his toy truck across the rug. He looked up when he saw Maria. Mommy! Maria immediately went to him. Noah stood and reached for her. Daniel watched them. Then he said quietly, he shouldn't have had to do that. Maria looked at him. Noah. She shook her head. He's 3, I know. He doesn't understand any of this, I know. Daniel crouched in front of Noah. The little boy looked at him. Hey, buddy. Noah held the toy truck against his chest. Wedding? Daniel smiled faintly. Not today. Noah looked toward Maria, then back at Daniel. Mommy okay? Maria's eyes filled. Daniel looked at her, then at Noah. She is. Noah seemed satisfied. He went back to his truck. Maria sat beside him. Daniel stood. For a few seconds he simply watched them. Then his eyes moved toward the ceremony area. The flowers were still there. The chairs were still arranged. The program still had his name beside Claire's. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning. Except Daniel no longer believed what he had believed when he woke up. He walked outside alone. The driveway was almost empty. A few petals had fallen across the stone path. Daniel stopped near the ceremony entrance. He thought about the woman he had planned to marry. Then he thought about Maria sitting in her car months earlier, holding her phone and trying to decide whether to call him. He thought about every time she had almost spoken, every time Claire had made him question her, every time he had assumed that because he trusted Claire, everyone else should too. The hardest part wasn't discovering that Claire had lied. It was realizing that Maria had been telling the truth in fragments for months, and he had been too comfortable to notice. Behind him, Noah laughed. Daniel turned. Maria was trying to keep him from driving his toy truck into a flower arrangement. Not through there, she said. Noah giggled. Daniel smiled, despite himself. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down. Another message had arrived. This one wasn't from Claire. It was from Ethan. Daniel opened it, and whatever relief he had felt for the first time that morning disappeared. Daniel opened Ethan's message. There were only a few words. We need to talk. Claire hasn't told you everything. Daniel stared at the screen. He could have ignored it. Part of him wanted to. But after everything that had happened that morning, he was done making decisions based on what he hoped was true. He called Ethan. Ethan answered almost immediately. Daniel, where are you? A pause. Not far. Come to the house. Another pause. Are you sure? Daniel's jaw tightened. Yes. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't look like the confident man Daniel remembered from charity dinners. He stood near the front entrance with his hands in his pockets, looking at the wedding decorations still scattered around the house. Daniel walked toward him. Start talking. Ethan looked at him. I know how this looks. It looks exactly like what it is, Ethan swallowed. I was seeing Claire. I know. She told me she was going to marry you. I know that too. Ethan looked down. Daniel waited. Finally, Ethan said, I encouraged some of the financial conversations. Daniel's expression didn't change. Some, the property questions, the business structure, things like that. Why? Ethan hesitated. Because I thought Claire needed protection. Daniel gave a short laugh. From me? No. Then from what? Ethan didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer. You were planning for what would happen if the marriage failed. Ethan looked away. That was enough. Daniel nodded. So you knew? Yes, and Claire knew. And both of you thought I was too trusting to notice. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. I wouldn't put it that way. How would you put it? I thought you were in love. Daniel stared at him. I was. Ethan looked uncomfortable. I know. The silence between them lasted several seconds. Then Daniel asked, Did you love her? Ethan looked surprised. No. Daniel nodded. That answer, at least, had come quickly. Then what did you want? Ethan looked toward the driveway. Her. Daniel waited. And the life that came with her. There it was. No dramatic confession. No excuse that made any of it better. Just a man finally saying what he had wanted. Daniel dismissed him. After Ethan left, Daniel stood alone in the hallway. The wedding flowers were still there. He could hear staff quietly clearing dishes from the kitchen. A few hours earlier, he had expected to spend the evening celebrating. Now he was standing in a house that looked exactly the same, while his life had changed completely. Claire was waiting for him in the office. She had changed out of her wedding dress. Daniel noticed that before anything else. She looked smaller somehow, not because she had become weaker, because the version of her he had known that morning was gone. She stood when he entered. Did Ethan come? Yes. Claire closed her eyes. What did he say? Enough. She nodded. Daniel stayed near the door. I need you to understand something. Claire looked at him. I don't hate you. Her eyes filled. But I'm not marrying you, I know. And I'm not going to spend the next 6 months trying to decide whether I should forgive something you already knew was wrong. Claire looked down. I really did love you. Daniel believed her. That was the part that hurt. I think you did. She looked up. Then why isn't that enough? Daniel was quiet for a moment. Because love isn't the only thing a marriage needs. Claire wiped her cheek. I was scared. I know. I didn't want to be powerless. You weren't. I felt like I was. Daniel nodded. I understand that now. Claire took a breath. But you don't forgive me. Daniel looked at her. I don't know. She waited. I may forgive you someday, he said. That doesn't mean I should marry you. Claire lowered her eyes. That was the first time neither of them tried to argue. Daniel walked to the window. Outside, the last of the wedding guests were leaving. Claire followed his gaze. I ruined everything. Daniel shook his head. No. She looked at him. You didn't ruin everything. He paused. You showed me what everything actually was. Claire didn't respond. Daniel turned away. The marriage would not happen. The relationship was over. And for the first time since the wedding morning, Daniel stopped asking himself whether Claire had loved him enough. He had a different question now. Could he trust the life they would have built together? The answer had become painfully simple. No. The house was almost empty by the following afternoon. Most of the flowers had been collected, the chairs were gone. The wedding programs had been boxed up and moved into a storage room because nobody knew what else to do with them. Maria was in the kitchen cleaning a counter that was already clean. She had been doing that for several minutes when Daniel walked in. You don't have to do that. Maria looked at the cloth in her hand. I know. You've wiped that spot about 6 times. She looked down. A small smile appeared. It's bothering me. Daniel leaned against the doorway. It's clean. I know. He smiled. For the first time since the wedding, the room felt almost normal. Then Maria's smile disappeared. I need to ask you something. Daniel nodded. Go ahead. Am I still working here? He looked at her. Maria quickly added, "I understand if things need to change." Why would they? Because of everything. Daniel shook his head. "Maria, you didn't cause this. I know. But," she looked away, "I don't know what you think of me now." Daniel was quiet. Then he walked into the kitchen and pulled out a chair. "Sit." Maria sat. He took the chair across from her. "I think you were scared." Maria nodded. "I was. I think you waited too long." She looked down. "I know. And I think you were trying to protect Noah." Her eyes lifted. "Yes." Daniel nodded. "I understand that." Maria looked relieved for only a second. Then Daniel added, "But I don't want Noah protecting you." She frowned. "He's 3. Exactly." Maria looked toward the hallway. "He shouldn't have had to understand any of this." "No," Daniel leaned forward. "He shouldn't have been carrying it around in his head." Maria swallowed. "I tried. I know. I didn't tell him anything." "I believe you." Maria looked at him. "Then why did he know?" Daniel gave a small shrug. "Because children notice things." Maria looked down at her hands. "I feel terrible." "Don't." She shook her head. "He ran into the middle of your wedding." Daniel almost smiled. He also stopped it. Maria looked at him. "That's not funny." "I know." A beat passed. "It's a little funny." Maria laughed despite herself. It was the first real laugh either of them had shared since the wedding morning. Then Daniel's expression softened. "You've worked here 15 years. Maria nodded. "I know what that means." "I don't think you do." She looked at him. "You've never treated this place like it was yours." Maria smiled. "Because it isn't." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." Daniel paused. "I don't want you staying because you think you owe me something. I don't." "Good. I've never wanted that." "I know." He stood. "Then nothing changes." Maria looked surprised. "Nothing?" "You still work here if you want to." She looked down. "I do." "Then you work here." Maria nodded. "Thank you." Daniel shook his head. "Don't thank me." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm not doing you a favor." That mattered to Maria. She could tell. A few minutes later, Noah came running into the kitchen with his toy truck. "Mummy!" Maria opened her arms. He climbed onto her lap. Then he looked at Daniel. "Daniel, what's up, buddy?" Noah held up the truck. "Look." Daniel crouched beside him. The truck had one wheel missing. Daniel examined it seriously. "This thing's in bad shape." Noah frowned. "Fix it." Daniel laughed. "That's not how life works." Noah stared at him. "Fix it." Maria laughed. "You heard him." Daniel shook his head. "Apparently I have a job." He took the truck. Noah watched closely as Daniel searched for the missing wheel. For several minutes, the three of them stayed there. No speeches, no discussion about Claire, no mention of Ethan, just a broken toy on a kitchen table. Eventually, Daniel found a small replacement piece in the junk drawer. He snapped it into place. Noah pushed the truck across the counter. "It works." Daniel smiled. Maria watched her son. Then she looked at Daniel. Something had changed between them. Not dependence, not obligation, trust, a quieter kind, the kind that didn't require anyone to pretend everything was perfect. Daniel stood. "Noah." The boy looked up. "You did a good thing." Maria stiffened slightly. Daniel noticed. "I mean, you told the truth." Noah nodded. "Claire bad?" Maria immediately said Noah. Daniel held up a hand. "It's okay." He crouched again. "People can make bad choices." Noah considered that. "Like eating cookies?" Daniel smiled. "Exactly like eating cookies." Noah seemed satisfied. He pushed his truck away. Maria looked at Daniel. "You're good with him." Daniel smiled. "I'm learning." And for the first time, Maria believed the house might eventually feel normal again. Not the old normal. Something better. Something honest. 3 months after the wedding that never happened, Daniel stopped taking calls during breakfast. That would have surprised the people who worked for him. For years, breakfast had been the easiest time to reach him because he usually started working before anyone else. Now he left his phone on the counter. Maria noticed the change one morning. "You're not checking your messages." Daniel looked at the phone. No. Are you sick? He laughed. No. Then who are you? Daniel smiled. I've decided emails can wait until 9. Maria shook her head. That's dramatic. I know. She walked away. Daniel picked up his coffee. He liked the quiet. Not because he had suddenly become a different person. He still worked too much. He still checked numbers twice. He still hated meetings that could have been emails. But something had changed in the way he handled uncertainty. He no longer believed that careful planning could prevent every painful surprise. That lesson had cost him enough. Claire had moved out of his life. There had been no public scandal, no interviews, no revenge. The wedding was simply cancelled, and the people who needed to know eventually learned why. Daniel had protected his businesses and reviewed his financial arrangements with his advisors. Then he stopped. He didn't spend months trying to punish Claire. He didn't need to. The relationship had already ended. What remained was the part nobody could fix with lawyers: trust. One evening, Daniel found himself sitting outside while Noah played in the yard. Maria was nearby, folding a small jacket. Noah pushed his toy truck through the grass. He looked up. Daniel. What? Look. The truck had made it over a patch of dirt. Daniel nodded seriously. That's impressive. Noah smiled. Maria laughed. He's been trying that for 20 minutes. I can tell. Noah drove the truck toward Daniel. Then he stopped. Where Claire? Maria looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Noah. She doesn't live here anymore. Why? Daniel paused. Things didn't work out. Noah considered that. Then he shrugged and drove away. Maria smiled. That's probably the best explanation he's going to get. Probably. They watched Noah for a moment. Then Maria said, Do you ever think about that day? Daniel knew which day she meant. Sometimes. I still feel bad. You don't need to. I should have told you sooner. Yes, Maria looked at him. Daniel smiled. But you told me eventually. She nodded. That matters. Daniel looked across the yard. I used to think being careful meant knowing exactly what to do. Maria waited. Now I think sometimes it means knowing when to stop. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. A few minutes later, Noah ran back toward them. He climbed onto the chair beside Daniel. Daniel? Yeah? You remember? Remember what? Noah grabbed the front of Daniel's shirt. Don't marry her. Daniel looked at him. Maria froze. Noah laughed. Then he ran away. Daniel started laughing. Maria covered her face. Oh, Lord! Daniel shook his head. He remembers everything. He's 3. Apparently that doesn't matter. Maria smiled. Daniel watched Noah disappear around the corner. The memory was still there. The little hands gripping his jacket, the frightened eyes, the silence in the room. But time had changed what the memory meant. Noah hadn't known the details. He hadn't understood Claire's affair. He hadn't understood money. He hadn't understood why adults kept lowering their voices when he entered a room. He had simply seen his mother frightened. And when everyone else had stayed quiet, he had said something. That was all. Daniel thought about how many times in his life he had trusted numbers because they felt safer than people. Numbers could be checked. People had to be trusted. And sometimes trust meant accepting that you might be wrong. Daniel looked toward Maria. You know what the strangest part is? She raised an eyebrow. What? I spent years thinking I was good at recognizing risk. Maria smiled. You are. In business. Mostly. Daniel laughed. That's fair. He looked at Noah again. I just didn't realize I was better at protecting my money than protecting my judgment. Maria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Maybe you needed somebody who wasn't afraid to interrupt you. Daniel smiled. Apparently I got one. Noah came running back with his truck. Daniel reached out and caught him before he could crash into the chair. The boy laughed. Maria shook her head. Slow down. Noah grinned. Daniel held him for a moment before letting him go. The house was quiet. There was no wedding to prepare for, no flowers, no guests, no carefully arranged future waiting around the corner. Just Maria, Noah, and Daniel sitting in the same yard on an ordinary afternoon. Daniel had once believed the worst thing that could happen was losing the future he had planned. He understood now that sometimes the future you lose is the one that was never safe to begin with. And sometimes the decision that changes your life isn't made after you know the whole truth. Sometimes it's simply the decision to stop long enough to admit that you don't. Before you leave, I want to ask you something. Was Maria wrong for staying silent for so long, or do you think she was right to protect her job and Noah until she had enough courage to speak up? Because honestly, that part of the story stayed with me. She knew something was wrong, but she was afraid Daniel wouldn't believe her, and in the end it took a 3-year-old child to say what the adults were too afraid to say. So tell me in the comments, if you were Maria, would you have warned Daniel the moment you saw Claire with Ethan, even if it meant risking your job? Or would you have waited until you had proof? I really want to read your answer. And if Daniel's story made you stop and think about the people we sometimes ignore when they're trying to warn us, like this video, subscribe to Mr. Graham's Stories, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next story.
Thank you for watching Mr. Graham's Stories, my beautiful, amazing family.